going to ask you to start by just saying your name and telling Annie and I where we are right now.
In my career? In my life?
No, like location-wise.
Oh, okay.
That'll come later.
What are you? Okay, I'm Matthew Morrocco, and right now we are in Bushwick, Brooklyn, right by the Morgan L, in my new apartment.
Nice.
3 days old.
Nice. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to catch you, right when you are somewhat settling into to your new place, which also seems to be a live workspace.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And I just want to start by talking about yourself and work. Primarily now, I guess we can just start off by having you describe how you became an artist.
Okay. Well, the work mostly focuses on two things. One is gay men, and the other is my family, and my relationship to both of those things. It's really a way for me, recently in particular, to mine a history, both my family history and sort of all of the implications of that, as well as this history that I was really never a part of, which is the homosexual American history, which is not something I grew up knowing about or experiencing or being a part of. It was really where those two things cross over, which is really of interest to me right now. When I decided to become an artist, I think, pinpoint the time.
You can?
Yeah, I mean, in particular, when I first studied abroad in Berlin, two major things happened. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. My great-grandmother died on Christmas Day, and I remember going to her house on Christmas Eve and seeing her sort of, really dying and emaciated. She was 96 and emaciated and moaning, and she couldn't say anything, and it was really, the figure, the crucifix above her bed, because we're Catholic, Italian-American Catholics, and I grew up going to church every Sunday and being very much a part of that community and sort of the drama of it all, and life and death sort of thing. And I remember that experience as being really intense and important, and then going abroad and being away from my really intense, large family for 6 months, which was like the first time I'd been that far away for that long, and then breaking up with my boyfriend of 1.5 years, and being in a place like Berlin, where the contemporary art scene is sort of incredible. So all of those things sort of coming together, and then I was really at that point that I was like, I'm going to do this for real. Because it was the first time that it seemed possible to be able to be an artist. Because before that, I knew I always wanted to do it, but it never seemed accessible.
And what made it accessible?
Berlin.
Being in that place.
Being in that place where people where being an artist was something that people did. I just felt like when I was in New York, you say you want to be an artist, people roll their eyes. But if you say you want to be an artist in Berlin, people were like, really, tell me more about that. Let's talk about it. So for me, that was really a catalyst.
And was that when you picked up the camera?
I had picked up a camera, I think, when I was like 12, because I liked taking pictures of my family, which was interesting. But it was, I think, the first time I picked up a camera seriously as an artist.
And you were talking about earlier, the two major themes in your work about being a homosexual man and also about family.
Right.
Right. So how are you studying these things in your work?
an interesting. Mostly I'm finding gay men that I've never met before and taking pictures of them as if we are a family.
How are you finding them?
Online, usually through Craigslist. It's funny, actually, I'll often get messages back like, I'm a young photographer looking for, you know, a man to photograph, and they're like, hey baby, what's going on? You know, and I'm just like, sorry, you misunderstood my post. But, which is an interesting sort of dynamic of like, because mostly I'm seeking out men who are over 40.
Okay.
Which is, I think you can see that most of these, not him, and he's not gay actually.
And, well, I mean, it sounds like their response is really important, the way that they respond to you, you know. Why is that? Like, what are you listening for in a response to your
from
invitation?
them?
Yeah.
It depends. I'm really, at this point, I'm mostly just interested in anybody that's interested in me, whatever that might be. For whatever reason, I'm interested in people who want to help me or do something for me, because I think really what I'm looking for is a kind of reciprocal relationship between us, where I'm putting myself in a vulnerable position, because I think a lot of the problem with photography is that Susan Sontag polemic of when as soon as you pick up a camera, you're taking advantage of someone. And if I'm the person that is vulnerable in the situation, then I kind of challenge that idea of being the aggressor.
So is the viewer in some way, or the sitter, or subject in some way, taking advantage of you?
Yeah, that's the goal. That's what I'm trying to do, of like, you know, being the one who is being taken advantage of, sacrificing myself for something larger. Sort of maybe it's for the photographic medium in general, or for them as subjects, or them as men, or I think what I really want is to put the power in their hands, while at the same time not sacrificing my own dignity, which is difficult often.
How do you create familiar situations with strangers? And, you know, what kind of techniques do you have to use in order to create that, at least through the lens, that sense of familiarity?
Calm voice.
Calm voice?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, often, yeah. Just say, okay, and now we're gonna do this, and just act very like everything is completely normal, even though inside your heart is beating so fast that you just want to like scream and jump around. But you just pretend that everything is okay and everything is completely normal. And you know, meeting someone that you've never met before in a private space where nobody else can see you, and doing things that are kind of not, you know, morally kosher, is it's difficult. Yeah. But it's exciting.
But I wonder if playing with morality, that kind of walking that moral line, is a part of, you know, conscientiously a part of what it is that you're doing.
Well, I mean, I look at people like Deanne Arbus, for example, who's a big influence of mine. You know, I think her work is really, a lot of people look at it and think of it as really morally ambiguous. But there's something about the work that she makes that is, that makes it really important. You know, she's looking at these people who people don't look at, and she's really excited and engaged by them. And in a way, she gives them all the power, and she makes them, the pictures are interesting to look at. You're not sympathetic to the figures who have these crazy deformities. You're interested in them, and it's not in a sympathetic way, it's in an empathetic way, which I think is unique and important. And if we're talking about generosity, I think something like empathy is extraordinarily important in generosity. Whereas But we can get into that.
Well, I think we might as well talk about it since you brought it up, and we can kind of circle back around to any other points that you wanted to bring up. But I like that word empathy. I like hearing you say it, especially in relation to thinking about generosity, and if that's an aspect of generosity that you're playing up, in your practice. You should expand on it for us a little bit more. Like, how is the empathetic a part of what it is that you're doing?
Right.
And, I think it's especially important, considering that power relationship that you were speaking about, that Susan Sontag writes about.
Right.
How do you then bring in empathy?
Here's the thing: for me, to be generous was always something that I always really approached with a lot of trepidation, because I always saw generosity as something that like wealthy people did to sort of cover their back. Like, I feel bad that I'm so wealthy, so I'm going to give money once or twice a year, and that's going to, make me feel okay about myself. But that's a very sympathetic sort of approach to the idea of being generous, and I think all it really does is allow the disparity of wealth to be much larger than it is. And if you take generosity as from an empathetic standpoint rather than a sympathetic standpoint, you can actually do something real rather than just maintain your power status.
I just had some color. I think that's like plastic. It's plastic.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry for distracting you.
That's fine.
Okay. So, empathy, right? We're just talking about the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Right.
Right. And so now, how does that apply to the relationships that you set up with the camera?
I think what I'm really, for me, it's all about trying to empathize rather than sympathize. And the way that I sort of deal with that is I often make myself the subject, or like I said, make myself the vulnerable one, or I put myself in their position. I take a picture with them, or let them take a picture of me, or try to deal with the relationship between subject and artist in that way.
Why are you using the portrait as your sort of primary visual means for these types of investigations?
That's an interesting question. Just always seemed like what I should do. I think mostly because that's what interested me. Like Diane Arbus, for example. Again, she always took portraits. And I think also I'm interested in people. I'm interested in one-on-one interactions. I've always been really, I have a lot of social anxiety. And I think, but I always really enjoyed speaking to people, but not on a larger sort of community level, but in a small group settings, like one-on-one. Is something that I've always really enjoyed. So that, I think, is the reason I'm focusing mostly in portraits. It's I get a lot of one-on-one time.
I was also thinking that there's maybe something to, again, that power relationship that's typically inherent in the way that portraits are made. That relationship between the photographer and the sitter.
Right.
It's typically a very kind of linear power dynamic that's going on there. And so listening to the things that you're saying about subverting power and bringing in elements of empathy and vulnerability, seems to me that there's something that you want to challenge about that structure, that taking, or at least those roles between, who's the photographer and who's the sitter.
Right. That's always been really important to me. Not even just in terms of art or photography, but in terms of everything. Because I think you know, I did a project on my grandparents a while ago, and, you know, in our sort of Christian faith, they talk about respect your elders, and that's always been really important to me, is to have a kind of respect for my elders. But, you know, old men still have things to learn from young people, and if we, you know, aren't able to talk back or sort of you know, challenge that power dynamic, then what's the point? I mean, you know, that reciprocal relationship is so important, and I think it keeps older generations. Yeah, I mean, I have a really important relationship with my grandparents, and I think it's what keeps them still moving. It's like their relationship with me, and me challenging them at every turn and keeping them on their toes. It's like, it's I think really important. And if we don't, I mean, this may sound silly, but like that's what America is, really. As Americans, it's like challenging authority, and you know, I think it's just as important to do in photography as it is to do every day. You know? Well,
I mean, that's the first time in our speaking here that you brought up this notion of authority and challenging authority.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
In terms of my work, or just in terms of everything?
In terms of your work.
Well, I mean, the big authority that I'm challenging, I think, is this sort of the authority of the photographic elite, if that makes sense. Sort of like, you know, Susan Sontag, who talks, who's like, this is what photography is, and this is how, yeah, the theorists, the people who sort of create ideas about what it means to be a photographer, and that kind of authority, the kind of stuff that they teach you in schools, like you can't cut off the hands, you have to have the whole, you know, the whole person in the frame. Like, what if I don't want to have the whole person in the frame? What if I want to color correct a little differently? Or what if I want to do something else? Like, you really, I think, it's important as an artist to be able to challenge that authority, and the way I do it is through, you know, challenging who's the vulnerable, who has the vulnerable position when taking a photograph. Or at least I attempt to.
I'm also curious about how you challenge authority with the way that you interact with people in your subjects, or if you've thought about that relationship between, you know, sort of that invitational of inviting people to be a part of your practice, and how that is in some way a challenge to these authorities that you're kind of want to push with and against.
Yeah. I mean, I think another big thing that I find most of my subjects online and through Craigslist, or even through the iPhone app Grindr, which I think most people are really, it's kind of, I was really uncomfortable when I first started doing it, but then I realized that everybody on there feels ashamed in some way. You know, it's really kind of a shameful thing. You know, nobody is completely open about being on there, and nobody. So, I mean, you know, I became more comfortable seeking people out, and so that kind of the authority of other people looking down, being condescending to people who use internet dating or Craigslist or Grindr to find other people, challenging that and actually trying to make a connection by going into their homes and meeting them and not having sex with them, but just photographing them and talking to them about what they do and who they are and trying to figure them out, really interests me, and it's exciting because I'm both getting to know somebody new and at the same time challenging what people think of as, you know, the sort of dirty Craigslist behind the computer or what have you.
But do people, when they do your photographs, they don't necessarily know the origin?
No, they don't.
Okay.
So
and that's on purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, it's kind of shameful.
So you don't want to?
Not yet.
Want to veil that, or at least keep that mystery?
Yeah.
Kind of.
vague.
Yeah, keep it vague.
Yeah.
So we're here because I'm engaged in or I'm taking part in this project that is about the idea of social engagement and really thinking about artists who are working in socially engaged practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've sort of been working within this definition of social engagement that really focuses on the connections between people.
Mm-hmm.
And really seeing that as the crux of what motivates an artist or someone with a creative practice to work and to make things,
right.
and to just kind of want to be out in the world, you know. So I'm just curious to hear your point of view on what you think socially engaged practice is, or if this is a term or a phrase rather that you've heard before,
mm-hmm.
and where you position yourself within that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it before, and I've never, to be honest, I didn't really think about it in terms of my own work, even though all I really am is all I do is take pictures of people. I mean, there's nothing more socially engaged than, I'm not nothing, but there are a few things more socially engaged than what I do, which is spend time talking and photographing people.
But why did you not think of your work in those terms?
Well, mostly because I think of socially engaged practice as something that is about building community, and community was always something that's very physically oriented. You know, when I first went to NYU, there were LGBT meetings, and that was sort of socially engaged artwork in a way. You know, people meeting and talking about these things, like groups of people doing that kind of thing. And for me, somebody who has a lot of social anxiety, that was never something that I could really engage in. And this kind of work, I think, is really, for me, about engaging a community of people who aren't interested in physical communities, or like large communities. Because I think what is interesting and unique about New York is kind of this anonymity and this sort of community, this kind of individualism that is really important to me. You know, it's one-on-one versus I'm building a community around my work and around myself, but it's not large, and it doesn't, and we don't have meetings, and, you know, we don't do things like community outreach and stuff like that. It's me and another person, and I think we both, I mean, I definitely benefit from meeting these people, and I'm hoping that they benefit from meeting me. And in that way, I am socially engaged.
Well, I mean, do you see yourself as a part of this community of men?
I do.
Yeah.
Because I am gay.
Right.
Took me a while to be comfortable saying that, but I am, and you know, I can't fight that anymore. So if going to an LGBT drop-in center is not something that I can do, you know, because for whatever reason it is, this is something that I can do, and this is something that I enjoy doing, and this is something that I spend, you know, as much free time as I can doing, and you know, that individual interaction is really important to me, and I think I've definitely learned a lot from it. But you know, we'll see where it goes.
So what are you visualizing about this community that you feel isn't already visualized? What are you visualizing through your work? What are you making apparent or making evident?
I think or at least what I'm trying to make apparent is that there are, you know, like I said, I'm targeting older men, usually over 40s. I think I'm trying to show older communities. It's, you know, people talk about gay death as something that happens after 30. You know, gay death is 30 years old.
Oh.
which I've learned recently. I didn't know that.
What does that mean?
It just means that you're irrelevant after 30 as a gay male, which is pretty harsh. You put the cow out to pasture after 30. That's like, that's quite a sad fate. But I think that like I said, I have a really important relationship with my grandparents, and at the beginning of this conversation, I said, mining two histories, one of my family and one of the gay male history, and we can't. I don't want to forget about this older group of men, because they are so important to our past and my past, a past that I'm not a part of. Not yet. Now that I'm doing this project, I'm becoming more a part of it and learning about it and experiencing it. So I'm sorry, I got away from the question.
So these men are in some way emblematic of, well, I don't know about your grandparents, but particularly maybe your grandfather.
Yeah, they're emblematic of that relationship, of bequeathing me with the kind of history that I've always, a culture, a history that's important. I mean, because I think there was something that happened with AIDS in the 80s where, most gay men died, and all of a sudden it was really, there was this great booming culture in the 70s, and even if it had to do mostly with sex, it was still really important. I mean, actually, in the arts in particular, I think Fran Lebowitz said something like, if we got rid of, I think the impact of AIDS on the art community is that if we, I can't remember exactly, but she said basically if we got rid of all the homosexuals in the arts, then we would basically be left with, the culture that we would have in America would be left with, let's make a deal. So, I mean, clearly their impact was really important, and I think a lot of that was pushed to the side once AIDS came along, and gay people became much more marginalized and less important. And I think for me, it's about discovering that importance and through people that were alive during the time, and recognizing that there is a history to it, and trying to find it and explore it and learn from it and be a part of it.
There's something so patriarchal about it. Just listening to you speak, and it isn't something that I feel like was necessarily evident at first, but now listening to you speak about particular things like power, authority, generation, and generations that have come before you in history, there seems to be a patriarchy there, but not patriarchy, I think, in the way that, generally it's talked about, from a very heteronormative perspective, although that patriarchy is there too, and thinking about your family and your grandfather. But there's this other patriarchy that is homosexual, same-sex loving, and somewhere in the way that you're working, it seems like they're converging. And, I don't know if you have thought about this, but what do you think about the idea of patriarchy as being something, or an authority or a power that you're also trying to
subvert,
turn into, or use as a creative force?
I'm confused.
Like these men behind you are father figures, they're grandfather figures.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent, yeah.
And they come, and listening to you speak, they come with a knowledge of things prior to you and your generation, right? They kind of are in that, once you get past 30, you're obsolete, but there's, to you, there's more than that. There's still something there, and they are able to speak to a time that precedes you, and you want to make yourself vulnerable to them you know, and you want to give power to them, but then you also want this reciprocity where it's not just a top-down thing, but it's this cyclical, you know, kind of giving and taking that's going on. And I was just wondering if you thought about how patriarchy, you know, the dominance of the male figure as the power role, right? How it plays out in homosexual culture, and you know what that means for you, if anything, and how, you know, these portraits come to be.
Right.
Yeah.
It's quite a question. I think it's in homosexual culture, it's more the power dynamic is constantly shifting. And if we can talk about it, I think, in sexual terms, which is, if we're thinking about sort of male-female relationships, there's always someone, you know, back since whenever.
Sorry.
You know, back since whenever the penetrator was the one who had the power, and the penetrated was the one who took it, or, you know, was the one who didn't have the power.
Right.
But in homosexual relationships, that's constantly fluctuating, of who's penetrating and who's penetrated. And so I think the power dynamic is much more nebulous. And so for me, I think my impulse for that nebulousness is from that.
Yeah.
Among other things. Does that?
Yeah, it does. It does. You know, because I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking about. You know, I think that from a heteronormative view, patriarchy is a little, I feel like, you know, you can understand it by gender dynamics. You know, it's like men make more money than women.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Men go out and work, women have the babies.
Right.
You know, not to say that that's not a powerful position to be able to have children, but from a patriarchal point of view, it's not the dominant position, or our society is not built around, you know,
that.
Exactly, as being the dominant position.
Right.
And so that's what I was asking, but how those relationships of dominance play out for you. And because I see that happening in the work, and the way that you approach your subjects, and then in the way that you orchestrate the portrait. You know, and for you, I think that patriarchy comes from a very generational perspective, you know, but maybe something beyond just generation, you know, being older and younger. You know, maybe there's an intimacy, maybe there's something about intimacy there as well.
Yeah, of how intimate, how intimacy plays out generationally.
Yeah.
Yeah, intimacy and sexuality and what happens.
And who has control in that? You know, like who has control in the way that? You know, who's the power?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I remember when I was in Berlin, I met this couple. One of them was 17, and the other was 38, and it was a really weird experience because I was in a bar, and the 38-year-old approached me and was like, "Isn't my boyfriend beautiful? Like, don't you want to sleep with him?" And I was, "Excuse me, sir," and it was really fascinating to watch their relationship play out. I didn't sleep with either of them, but they left after like half an hour. But the 38-year-old basically forced his 17-year-old on me while he sat really depressed looking over at the bar, and I thought, you know, which one of them, you know, I was really what interested me was, you know, how can we talk about this relationship, which is clearly one of reciprocal love and interest, without talking about incest? Can that actually happen? Because in most situations where you're talking about a sexual relationship between an older person and a younger person, it's always inevitable that you're going to be talking about incest, and I don't think that was what was happening with the two of them. They were just two people who really liked each other, which to me was a fascinating thing to observe.
Two people that really liked each other?
No, but two people who really liked each other, where like that kind of incestual thing was obviously something that was a problem for them, but also didn't stop them from having a relationship.
What's the incestuous there?
I mean, that guy was old enough to be the 17-year-old's father. It was like, so are these people, but you know, in that picture, we're both half naked.
So you're making
that.
Which?
That one, the one, any of them.
These are what you're pointing at are newer works.
Yeah.
So how is the project evolved to what it is that you're doing now?
Well, it started. Where did it start? I don't know. It's all over the place. Right now, it kind of started as I just wanted pictures. I wasn't really getting to know the people, and I was just meeting them and saying, okay, let's set up this weird scenario where I'm gonna, you're like, you know, I'd take an older person and I'd say, you're gonna keep your clothes on, and I'm gonna take my clothes off, and I'm just gonna sort of lie here and you can do whatever you want. I'm just gonna photograph it. And then it became me actually having interest in these people that I was meeting, and those two newer ones are more about that, where they're I became more comfortable with them being the subject rather than it was just me being the subject, me being the vulnerable one. I'm still, you know, creating these situations where I'm the focus of the image. Well, like I said in the beginning, I was the focus of the image because I didn't want to take advantage of them. You know, I was like, I'm going to take advantage of myself, and they're just going to be a part of it. And now I'm much more comfortable approaching them and trying to get their input in the picture.
And how does that usually manifest itself when you allow someone else's input in the photograph?
How does it what do you mean?
Yeah. What does that look like when once you start to allow other voices into how the image will be composed? What starts to happen?
I get really scared.
Why?
I don't know. I like to have the final say in what the image looks like, but it's also really exciting because new things start to happen. A lot of you know, how I think about photography has changed a lot because of the way people sort of position themselves or look directly into the camera or look away or do something completely different, and I start to break down new walls and learn things about myself, as well as learning about them. It's like, that's another point about sympathy and empathy is like, you know, they're not, if you're sympathetic to someone, you're not learning anything about them, and in return you're not learning anything about yourself. I think if you're empathetic to someone, you learn a lot. You try to learn a lot about them, and in the end you learn about yourself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a process of learning about yourself through your experiences with
other people.
Yeah, you know, and developing those relationships, you learn. I mean, it's really sort of a basic notion of how identities and selves are formed, and that's through kind of your relationship to another person.
Mm-hmm.
You start to kind of figure out who you are.
Right.
But I mean, that's also problematic as well, because, you know, theorists will call that a misrecognition. The way that you think you see yourself through the eyes of another person is a misrecognition. It's not true. It's already a false image, right? And one could say that about photography as well.
Yeah, it's always a false image.
Right, but then others may not.
Right.
Others, you know, lay claim to the truth of that image. You know?
Right.
But I wonder how allowing for other voices in the portrait making process shifts what you think about perspective at all, in relation to photographs and authorship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who is the maker?
Yeah,
of
it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say,
yeah.
But it's also difficult to say what the end product is.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can say it's the photograph, but a lot of the time the photograph doesn't do justice to what the experience was. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, I mean, I met a man who was HIV positive, and I took pictures with him and of him, and the pictures just didn't, I mean, that experience of meeting him and talking to him and learning about him and about where his life was really, really jarring and pretty, you know, to me it was difficult to deal with. Like, I couldn't look at the pictures for like a week after that. But I recently talked to him, and I wrote a little thing for a blog that I had started. And I sent it to him because I was saying I was going to post it, and I was going to post a picture, and he just didn't like at all what I had written, and didn't really like the picture, and so I didn't really post anything. And to me, it just, you know, so where did that, what, you know, what's the end product? Right. You know, where did, you know, what is the art now? Mm-hmm. Where is it? Where'd it go? It's like, is it in the air? You know, like, does it matter anymore? I mean, just because I got something out of it, and hopefully, I don't know, I mean, maybe he did too, but does it still matter?
So then how does that shift the way you think about the medium, the way you think about photography?
Yeah, the way
if there's no photograph at the end of the day, I mean, although pictures were taken.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the medium is so, it's just, either I have to be a better photographer or I have to change the way I work or not take pictures. Because it's impossible to truly represent what goes on in those situations between myself and the subject. And it's really difficult to navigate it. And I've been thinking about how I want to, in the end, to represent sort of what I've done and what I've been doing. And it's, you know, every time I talk to someone about it, they say something like, so what do you see as the end product? A coffee table book? And I'm kind of like, really? A coffee table book? The kind of thing that's going to sit in someone's, you know, on someone's coffee table that nobody's going to ever look at except when they're bored, and then at that point they'll just be thumbing through, not really looking at anything. My, you know, stuff that I've lost sleep over is going to become a paperweight.
Right. You know, but that could very well be the case. I mean,
yeah.
How do you feel? I mean, what is the end result, or what do you think about having to confront that question?
It sucks. But I mean, in the end, I feel like to be honest, have changed and hopefully grown so much by doing this. And
how so?
I'm just so much more comfortable with what I do, and I think that's the what I really want. I mean, the trick is to give that gift of being comfortable walking down the street or talking to people or confronting, you know, whoever you are, whether that be a gay man or whatever, is really the gift that I want to give. And how do I give that gift is really difficult to figure out. Maybe because I'm not completely there yet, but I've been doing this work. It's been really difficult. It's hard to do. It's hard to meet these people. It's hard to talk to them. It's hard to confront this reality of who I am. And if at the end of the day that I achieve that, then I've achieved something good. But I want to bring it further.
So when will the project end?
Never.
It'll never end.
When I die. No.
Well, how do you determine something like that?
I don't know.
Terminus. Like
I'm done. It's when I can go to a bar where there are mostly straight people and not feel like a freak. Or I can make a joke like, well, I was at home. Funny story. I was at home and a lot of my cousins are at marrying age, and one of them said, and my aunt was going around to each of us and talking about when we were going to get married, and I said, you know, I might not be able to get married. You're going to have to take that one up with the government. And I started laughing hysterically, and everybody sort of looked at me with that weird sort of revulsion and pity of, you know, don't say things like that. You'll be okay. Don't worry. You know, I want people to laugh along with me in that situation. You know, I don't want people to feel sympathy for me anymore. I don't want to feel like a freak. I don't want to feel like I stand out for any reason. I just want to be normal.
Just want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when that happens, then I'll be done.
Fair enough. I also want to bring it back to family, because I'm also wondering what, from the perspective of your subjects, does family come up when you're when you're developing that closeness to them to get them to the point to take these photographs? They talk about their families?
I often make a point of asking them about that. Because these two men are actually a couple, and they live in the house that he was born in, which is interesting. And they still talk about their families, and they're still a part of them, which always was really surprising to me, because I always felt like the typical story of the gay male was you chose between, you know, your life of sin or your family. And for me, that I never really had to make that choice, and a lot of people, it seems like, didn't really have to either, which was always really surprising. Like that man who I spoke about, who was HIV positive, went back to live with his family, with his parents, which, you know, perhaps that's a failure, but at least, I mean, to me, that was a triumph of being able to really, to crawl back on your knees is still being, you know, at least you have something to go back to. Doesn't matter if you, I guess it does matter, but I don't want that to happen to people. I feel like they have to crawl back on their knees, beg for forgiveness. Sorry, I don't know where that I was going with that.
We were talking about families.
Yeah, I mean, people, yeah, I always make a point of asking, and a lot of them are usually have a positive reaction to that question of, you know, what's your family like? And they begin to speak about them with affection and as if they're really important, which to me is always really the most is a really powerful thing.
Has the project or your kind of commitment to this project shifted how you conceive of family? What that word means? how expansive or maybe limiting that it is, or that it can be?
Yeah. Well, I went into the project thinking about those things of how having close relationships with people that are in your family at once limit you and set you free of whatever. You know, you can, with a strong family base, you feel, you know, invulnerable, but at the same time, you're totally subject to, you know, who they think you are. Mm-hmm. Like we were speaking about with, you know, who you truly are, what is your truth. It's like, you know, as long as you're in a family setting, mm-hmm. you're never going to be whatever you know, like you're always going to be subject to who they think you are and who you were when you were 2 years old, and that's not really a good way to live your life. And so from that standpoint is where I, in terms of that idea, is where I came into this project, of knowing that it's wonderful to have a family, but it's also really difficult, limiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your experiences in your family, as vast as those can be for people,
yeah,
are sort of the jumping off point for how you think about community,
mm-hmm.
and how you create connections with other people.
Right.
How you start to build communities.
Right. Because I think one of the reasons I shy away from community is because my family is so huge. I mean, Christmas Eve was 40 people, you know. Christmas Day is a lot more, and you know, I just want some quiet one-on-one time. Mm-hmm. You know, I want people to be able to take me seriously with, you know, as that one-on-one time, and I think that is what is important to me, and that's what I'm seeking, and that's what I'm looking. I mean, among other things, that's one of the things, one of the main reasons I'm mm-hmm. approaching the project the way that I am.
When you were bringing up morals,
mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly, that was the word you used, morality or shame?
Probably.
Something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also something I think a lot about in relation to the idea of social engagement.
Yeah, you wrote something about that on the website.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me.
Yeah, this kind of distinction between ethics and morals, because I
mm-hmm.
think that social engagement is definitely grounded in ethical concerns.
Yeah.
But that when morality becomes a part of it, then you start to enter into all these problematics. Again, when you start talking about sympathy,
mm-hmm.
From a sympathetic perspective, from this kind of, you know, overseer perspective of mm-hmm. things, and you want to do something that's good. You know, everything. There's a saying about good intentions.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
The path
to hell is paved with good intentions,
or something like this and that. You know, and there's always these moral judgments made about art. You know, like, well, is it good?
Yeah.
It's bad.
Yeah.
And I feel like for a lot of times, you know, people involved in art are constantly always have to like deal
navigate
with things from these sort of binaries of if it's good or bad. And I just wonder if we can get away from that.
Yeah.
At all, and perhaps if we thought more in terms of the ethical position, the structures, the patterns, the systems that instigate particular behaviors, that then we place moral judgments on, you know, but really looking at those structures that motivate us to move in particular kind of ways or behave in particular kind of ways. Mm-hmm. Where, if you even, you know, are feeling the distinction I make between morals and ethics, I wonder what is the ethical question in a project like yours, in your approach to image making. Mm-hmm. What are those ethics that you want to really drudge up, those systems, those patterns, behaviors that you want to bring to the foreground?
Well, yeah. well, I mean, interesting question. It's a tough question. Because I think for me, what's when we can talk about, I'm trying to think of how I want to answer this. I think a lot of the things that I'm trying to deal with have become moral problems, even though I don't think that they should be spoken about in those terms.
Really?
I mean, we talk about gay marriage as a moral issue. Is that really a moral issue, or is it, something else? Is it I mean, because when Barack Obama came out when Barack Obama said, did you hear about that? When he said, he supported gay marriage. It was never, I mean, all of the things that I read were saying, how is this going to affect the election? It was never like, how does this affect people? Or, it was like, what was that politically sound move for Barack Obama to do? Like, this isn't, it's we can talk about it as a moral issue until we're blue in the face, but really it's a political issue. And for me, this idea of what is, morally, I mean, I don't even know what that means anymore. What are morals? What is good and bad? And
coming up in the Catholic faith, I mean, I feel like you have to confront.
My priest, the priest that I really liked, the one who said the quickest mass and who I really enjoyed actually listening to, was a child rapist who took advantage of my grandmother. Not sexually, but, she was very religiously oriented and gave a lot of money to the church that he used to, go to New York.
Yeah, just misused
and
abused.
Totally abused. And it was really, really jarring and interesting to be like 13 years old and seeing your grandfather have to literally kick a priest out of your grandmother's house. My great-grandmother, actually. Just to literally say to him, if you come back here, I will call the police. And these are supposed to be the people who are in, your moral shepherd.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not really how I thought of them, but that's what they were supposed to be.
Right.
To me.
They're models for.
Right.
To be models for a particular way that you sort of
live your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, those ideas of what it is, those moral ambiguities are strange and interesting. Is being gay a moral dilemma? I don't know. I don't really have a choice in the matter, so.
Perhaps it doesn't matter if it's a moral dilemma or not.
Yeah.
I mean, some things just are.
What they are.
you know what I'm saying? They just are. They just are. And the moral judgment is just precisely that capacity by which to add value or to assess value of something, or whether or not something should be a part of our social realities or not. So it's not necessarily something that's beneficial or nurturing or fruitful for a people, but it's typically a means of control. Being able to control people, and that oftentimes things that are challenging in terms of our moral position are oftentimes, I think, really useful in being able to open up spaces.
Well, look at Laurel Nakadade's work. I mean, people are up in arms. I mean, I know a lot of people who are like really up in arms about that, and I think she the way that I think about it is there's this scene in the Jackson Pollock biopic where Lee Krasner, he starts dripping paint on the floor, and she says, you know, "You've cracked it, Jackson. You've cracked the case wide open." And I think Laurel Nakadada cracked the case wide open with what she's doing. And I think even if it's a little morally ambiguous, it's still really important work in terms of, again, power dynamics and, you know, femininity and a whole bunch of other things that I think are really important. Her sort of moral ambiguities aside, it's still, I think, it's really important work. And again, someone like Deanne Arbus, who I think is still really important work and still a little morally ambiguous. And, for me, I think it's something that I have struggled with. Is like, am I really taking advantage of this 40-year-old man who just wants to sleep with me, or, you know, by, you know, photographing him, you know, or whatever.
How do you confront that dilemma? You know, do you confront that dilemma by putting it right out there, by letting, you know, your subject know that, you know, I really think that, you know, I might be taking advantage of you?
Yeah, well, it depends on the person. I mean, sometimes I'm very sort of open and honest about it. I'm saying, it's like, I know what you want from me, but you're not going to get it. And or I just like kind of play into what they want and then get what I need in terms of the picture, and then sort of, or in terms of their time or whatever, and go my merry way. So it's different every time. I mean, it depends on the person, and, you know, sometimes what I'm really doing is not what I think I'm doing. So it's, that's another topic.
I think that's a great way to end it. I think that was a perfect culminating point.